Welcome back to yet another episode of SAFT podcast. And last week, I mean, the last episode, we left you at showing Christianity to be true. We just started off with that. And today we'll be talking about arguments, how arguments are useful and how they come in handy when we try and show Christianity to be true. So stay tuned as we get back. Yeah, so hey Jacob, welcome back to another episode, and I'm so glad to see you once again. And as I just mentioned to the audience, that today we'll be talking about how arguments are useful in showing Christianity to be true, how we use them. So without any further delay, I think it's time we just straight away dive in. So as you like, most of you must be remembering that in the previous episode we talked about two types of arguments, right? So one is deductive and the other one is inductive. So what are both of them? We'll be talking about that. And first up, we have the deductive arguments. So Jacob will be helping us to learn together. What is it?
Yeah, Ankit. So, like I said, let's get right into it. So, deductive arguments, and now out of these two, deductive arguments are pretty straightforward and they're easy to work with. And I would like to say they're also airtight in the way we formulate them. So, then we look at inductive arguments, you'll get that idea as to why I said they are airtight. So, in deductive arguments, the normal style is you would have so I'm just going to give you a normal style, okay? And this is a premise, and a conclusion. So now this is not always how all deductive arguments are. Like there are very complex, premise, a conclusion, and then out of that conclusion you derive another sub-premise, and then you go on, all and so forth. So basically what the words mean is that the word premise means a statement. That's it. It's a statement. And the most common form that we would see in apologetics arguments. So if you look at the Kalam cosmological argument or the moral argument or the fine-tuning argument, you would predominantly see this premise, conclusion, formulation. And when you go on to something like Anselm's ontological argument or the variations thereof, there would be much more premises and then a final conclusion. So that's how it would be. So, like I said, premises are basically statements, and let's look at an example to try and work out and understand what we are dealing with here. So, let's look at this example. If Caesar eats cyanide, Caesar will die. That is premise 1. Premise 2 is Caesar eats cyanide. And the conclusion is, therefore, Caesar dies. So, immediately you see the pattern that it says if, then, and then it says, this has happened, or this is the case, and the conclusion is therefore. So it is that format is also something that we predominantly see in deductive arguments. Again, not all deductive arguments need to have this, but we predominantly see this if then format in it. I don't know about you, but I'm using my hands too much, so I'm going to put down my hands for a while, and I'm moving around my arms too much.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the premise leads to the other one, right? So it's like a step by step, and if we talk about probability, then basically it's like the probability of the next step happening is like it's 100% probable that since premise 1 is there, the premise 2 will happen, right?
No, we don't look at probability when it comes to deductive arguments. Now, we will look at the word probability when we look at inductive arguments. So, with deductive arguments, both these statements, you could say they are independent, right? So, I mean, and see, the whole point is that these deductive arguments are formulated by us. Like, we format these deductive arguments. So, when I said, if Caesar eats cyanide, Caesar will die. The second premise, Caesar eats cyanide. And the conclusion, therefore Caesar dies. So, this may have happened in real life. Okay, I mean, obviously Caesar didn't die. None of the Caesars died by cyanide. But even if this has happened in real life, this argument is not found in nature. Like you don't look at the sky and you see this written out there in nature. No, I am formulating the argument, let's say, based out of something that may have even happened in real life, or maybe I'm trying to predict something that happened in the real life, and I'm saying, okay, if Caesar eats cyanide, he will die. So therefore, don't eat cyanide. maybe I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to predict and prevent
Yeah.
Caesar from eating cyanide in the future. Even if that is the case, whether it's something that's happened and I'm deriving and formulating an argument out of something that has already happened, or even if I'm trying to predict something that is going to happen, even in that scenario as well, at the end of the day, these arguments are something that I am formulating. So so that is integral to the question when we ask how independent they are. I can make them truly dependent on each other and make them more complex and say, like you said, keeping these simple argument, I can add conditional probability and say if premise 1 is true, then the probability premise, and I can make that complicated, or I can keep them simply independent, as with this argument is. So I formulate
But
the
then the
first premise
final
saying,
premise which
if
is
Caesar
there,
eats cyanide.
that is dependent on the previous ones, right? Like the first premise,
You
second
mean the
premise, and
conclusion?
then the third one. Yeah, the conclusion. That is not
The conclusion,
independent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously. No, that definitely not. So like you said, it's a step by step. So I'm tempted to go into a step by step analogy. I'm having the SAF podcast temptation to make an analogy out of this. But anyway, it's like both it's one after the other, and eventually it's those steps that lead you to the top, or lead you to the bottom. So you get the conclusion through the premises, and that's the key thing. You want to get at the conclusion. So that's what we're trying to do with an argument. So if you look at the Kalam cosmological argument, which says that the universe has a cause, okay, the argument's formulation is meant to bring us towards that conclusion. That's the whole direction in which we are moving towards.
Okay.
Okay, so coming back to it. So you have these two premises and then the conclusion. And so the soundness of that formulation of the argument is dependent upon two aspects. And one is, are those premises true? All right, or are they more plausibly true than their denial? We'll look at that possibly maybe within this episode as well. So are those statements true? And the other thing is, like you asked about the fact that is connecting them, is there a sort of logical connection between these two? So let me try and break down. I mean, the first part is very clear. Are those premises true? Is it true that if Caesar eats cyanide, that Caesar will die? And we could say yes. We have the scientific data on this. We have these studies that show that cyanide is poisonous, and so on and so forth. And someone could come and contest that by saying, hey, we found another scientific data showing that if people eat cyanide, people won't die. So you can't say that, therefore, if Caesar eats cyanide, he will die. So that will be the contention there. Is that statement true or not? And then when you come to premise 2 again, you will still ask, is that statement true? Did Caesar eat cyanide? And there again, people can contest and say, no, Caesar did not actually eat cyanide. He ate something else that looked like cyanide. And again, the contention is there again, if that is cyanide or not. So that would be the first criteria that we would look at deductive arguments. When I'm presenting a deductive argument that has this premise, conclusion, formulation, are those premises true? And the second thing is, the logic that is connecting these two premises, are they valid? Or another way would be saying that, are there any logical inconsistencies or logical errors of reasoning within these two premises? So an example would be, this is not exactly a great example, but this would get the point across. So there is an error in reasoning, a logical fallacy called fallacy of false equivocation. Right? I know big words, but very simple stuff. What that means is that when you are, this can apply to arguments or an essay, even an essay that you write. You use the word to mean one particular thing at the beginning, for example, and then halfway through, you use the same word, but it means something completely different. So a good example would be the word Greek. Greek is a language, it's a food, and it's an ethnicity. So when you say he is Greek, I'm not saying that he's edible, but I'm not saying that he's a language, but he is of that ethnicity, he's of that nationality of the nation of Greece. But the same word Greek can, like I said, it can mean language and it can mean a style of food. So if I am presenting some sort of argumentation and let's say I'm talking about food, okay, different types of food, and in the first premise I use the word Greek to mean as a food, and in the second premise I say, for example, Greek is banned in country X, and there I may be meaning as in, in country X, you are not allowed to speak the language Greek, right?
Yeah.
There could be some country where, the language Greek is not allowed. And
Yeah.
therefore, I'm trying to
Well,
say,
don't take it serious. It's
you
just an
cannot have
analogy,
Greek
okay?
food in
There's
that
no
country.
country which bans Greek.
Yeah,
So
that's
yeah, just
yeah.
making it clear.
If anyone finds country X, well, fabulous. You have found a country by the name X. So I've made sure that no one is going to go to that trouble. So that would be an example where someone might be trying to say, he uses the word Greek to mean the food, style of food in premise 1. And then premise 2 uses it maybe deceptively, that could be possible, or maybe just, blatantly, ignorantly uses the word to mean the language, and then tries to, sneak in the conclusion that Greek food is banned in that country. So here we would say, okay, that is a fallacy of false equivocation. You have used the same word in two different meanings within the argument. So premise 1 is therefore not connected to premise 2. Because like I said, you used one word in one sense and the same word in another sense. So there is nothing connecting them together. There is, there's sort of this asymmetry there, if I may. I don't think that's the right way to say it, but you get the point. That link is broken. So here we would look at and ask the question, so we asked, are the premises true? That's first criteria. And like I said in this example, we would ask the question, is the logic that is connecting these two premises, is the logic that is overriding these two premises, are they valid? So are there any logical errors committed? Are there any logical fallacies committed? And this can get into even more complex formats. So there are, I don't recall it off the top of my head. So there is modus tollens and modus ponens. Now, I have a guess that I may be mispronouncing them as well. So this would be different formulations of an argument. So it would be like, if A, then B. A, conclusion, therefore B. So this is a very valid way of formatting it. But an invalid way of formulating it is, if A, then B. Premise 2 says, B, conclusion, therefore A. So you're going if A, B, and then you're going from B to A. So that is actually an erroneous, a false way of formulating an argument. So if someone presents an argument using that form of connection, that argument is invalid because it is using an invalid way of reasoning there. But if someone says, the first format, if A, then B, A, therefore B, that is valid. So this is another way of testing to see if the premises are valid, if the logic is valid. So we would look at and see, are there any logical fallacies, like fallacy of false equivocation, so on and so forth. And also we would ask, the logical formulation of the premises, are they valid? Are they using the right logical reasoning formulations? Is the right logical reasoning formulation that is applied there? So these are the two criteria for us to assess and see if an argument is valid, if it holds the place. And there could be other ways also for us to look into a deductive argument and ask, if that is really the case. Another example would be, for example, when we look at the fine-tuning argument. Now, we look at it in depth. So in the fine-tuning argument, we say that the fine-tuning in the universe is due to physical necessity, chance, or design. So we say that there are these finely tuned attributes within the universe. Like I said, we'll go into them in depth down the line. So stay subscribed and stay connected with us. And one way I can challenge that premise, and I'm gonna ask you, Ankit, okay? I'm gonna challenge this premise, and you can tell me in what way am I testing the argument? Is it by checking if the premise is true, or is it by checking if the logic is valid? All right. So I'm contesting the premise 1 by saying that there is a fourth alternative. Let's say alternative X, Y, Z, and I'm contesting that premise. So my question to you is, am I contesting, and the audience also can think along with us, am I contesting that premise by attacking its truth, like whether it's true or not, or whether by attacking the logic? What do you think?
I think somewhat it depends on both of them. But mainly, I feel it's attacking the truth because the first three which you mentioned, which are there, they are they are proof with all facts. But then you're attacking with the fourth one, saying that whatever is true, these three which are true, you're making a statement that they are false. So you're attacking that truth. Yeah.
Yeah. So to put it out clearly, what I'm doing there is the premise one is saying, fine tuning is because of either these three alternatives. These are the only three alternatives that you can use to explain fine tuning. And I'm coming along and saying, no, you are wrong. There is a fourth alternative. So therefore, I'm saying that that premise is false. There is a false alternative, and you are false in stating that there are only these three alternatives. So that is where we are, like you said, we are contesting the truth of that premise. And
Right.
so this would take different forms of engaging with it. Some may be not straightforward in engaging. Like if I had said, if Caesar eats cyanide, Caesar will die, and I say, if Caesar eats cyanide, Caesar will not die. That is straightforward. That we know it is contesting the truth of premise one. But in the other example, it may not be immediately obvious to someone who is dabbling with the deductive arguments for the first time. And so there are different complex ways to go through it, but this is the general gist of it. Now, before I move on to
Yeah.
inductive arguments, which which is going to get even more complex for lay people like us, is there any thoughts probing your mind with regards to deductive arguments? Anything at the back of your mind?
Yeah, I think like right now I'll talk about my college. So we are doing a topic on in mathematics known as the Markov chain rule. So basically it means that like I can relate it pretty well with the deductive arguments because it states that if there are different states, like the premises are different states, then the present state depends on the previous one, not the ones before that. Okay?
Hmm.
Makes sense. So
Okay.
that's what I was relating with
Yeah.
the deductive arguments. And
Yeah, I get it.
yeah, so it's like a chain forming,
Yeah,
but
but like I said,
but if you keep yourself in
yeah,
the previous state, so that
yeah.
means the future depends on now, not on the past. Okay, so something like that.
Yeah, so it's like, you have one, two, and three. Three is dependent on two, not on one in that sort of a
Not
way.
on
It's
one.
it's dependent
Yeah,
on what is
yeah,
immediately preceding it. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. So here's the case with deductive arguments. A deductive argument is like a proper chain. So you take a chain, a long metal chain, and you can see one is clipped to the other, and then to the other, then to the other. Now, if at any point you break one of the link, it's gone. The entire thing is gone.
yeah,
You can't get to the
right,
end. So it's not just the idea about connecting one to the other, but it's that if at any point you take out one of the chain, that the linkage, the chain is completely gone. So, like I said, in this example of premise conclusion, it's not that too lengthy. But when you look at something like the ontological argument, there are, I think, about four premises, if I recall right, four or five premises, and then a conclusion. And then when you go into Gödel's versions of arguments, I think again Gödel's ontological version of argument, there are even more premises. So like it gets super complex because he's a mathematician. So you have, let's say, 10 premises and then a conclusion. So you don't have to disprove all 10 premises. Okay? You don't have to disprove the logic hidden within all 10 premises. If you just remove premise 2, the connection between 1 and 3 and the rest of it is completely gone. So it shows the burden that is incumbent upon the person who is formulating the arguments.
yeah,
He has to develop all of the premises and hold them true. For the person who is contesting, he just has to contest with one of the premise. And this comes, and since we're coming to the end of our short bite-sized episode,
yeah, yeah.
I think we look at inductive arguments next
Inductive
episode.
in the next one.
And so this way of attacking and deductive arguments comes more to the front when you look at complex issues like different theories of time. So there is A theory of time, B theory of time, and a person who holds on to A theory of time is looking at a very lengthy argument, like multiple premises and to a conclusion. And to him, premise 1, 2, and 3 are not problematic. They're all fine. But let's say premise 4 is something that assumes B theory of time, something that he doesn't hold on to. And so for him, he will just go away and straight away oppose premise 4 and say that is false. Now here may come along a person who holds on to the B theory of time. He will look at premise 4 and he say, yeah, that's fine because I hold on to B theory of time. Premise 4 assumes B theory of time, so I'm happy with it. But premise
Yeah.
3, 2, and 1, they assume A theory of time. So So he has a problem with 1, 2, and 3. So here is an example of how the person who will be formulating the arguments has to do the work of making all of the premises true. But he can face objections from a whole score of people holding to different ideas and different concepts about
Yeah.
notions and perceptions about these different premises and what they mean and the word usage and who can come and attack. So it actually goes on to show that when we look at these arguments in depth, the work that we have to do, the homework that we have to do from our end to be very well prepared so that we do our best in presenting the arguments and being confident in what we are presenting. So we hope that you will continue to stick with us in this series on natural theology as we break down bit by bit all of the complex and most popular, most easy to recollect, and even most effective, to me as well, most effective, most compelling arguments for God. And there's one bit that I would like to note with before we conclude. I think there is a possibility that we may have mentioned this somewhere in the beginning, but if not, we are going through this whole series based off the legendary Christian philosopher and theologian and someone whom we are a big fan of at SAFT, Dr. William Lane Craig's book, Reasonable Faith. So that's a phenomenal book and also not exactly layperson level. On God is layperson level. Reasonable Faith is a bit more advanced. So we are actually breaking down Reasonable Faith bit by bit and going through the series. So that's where we're driving all of our content. So we're looking towards the best philosopher in the field, one of the best apologists, and then we're breaking down the content. So you can be assured of that which we present in the Natural Theology series. And I just want to give credit to where credit is due. I mean, Reasonable Faith is a phenomenal book. Yeah, I think I thought we may get through to inductive arguments.
Me too.
But you asked some very, very pertinent questions, and I'm happy that I was able to break it down much more than I anticipated I would be able to break it down to. So I'm very excited that I'm happy that we were able to do that. All right. Yeah.
And as Jacob mentioned that, like these premises, I was just thinking like if even one of them is false, so that breaks the entire chain and the entire argument becomes flawed. So how much God has blessed these people, these philosophers who have come up with the arguments, these theologians have come up with the arguments. So they have done a pretty good job in formulating each and every premise. So similarly, he even mentioned that when we are showing Christianity is true to the people around us, it's very important that we ourselves are well prepared, knowing each and every premise. So when we show them, when we put forth an argument, it's totally clear and there's no objections. I mean, obviously there'll be objections which you'll have to face, but then you'll be able to confidently tackle them. So that's where we are aiming at, making this series bite-sized.
And put our we'll be able to do our part well and put our best foot forward. That's what we should do. Let there be objections. Let us do our part well.
Definitely. Yeah. So I think that's it from this episode. And the next one, we'll be talking about inductive arguments. And they also are equally important when we show Christianity to be true. So stay tuned with us. Follow us on our social media to stay updated. You can post in your questions on SpeakPipe and we'll be featuring them on our episodes and answering you live. So that's it from our side. And this is Ankit and Jacob signing off. See you in the next one.